Halfway through the agenda, I don't know either.
Are you off?
No, I'm looking at a draft
Ty's looking at the draft.
off my desk when we hash mark half the agenda item.
I'm like,
Some people can't be helped.
get it.
The two grader. Nice.
That'd be something I do, Ty. That's why I'm giggling.
Shoots me right off the edge.
That's
That's why I work at paper.
I keep scooting this way. Fall off. Huh? I'm gonna drive off the edge, but right where I need to be. Extra glasses. I got these. Denise generally has an extra pair, don't you, Denise?
What's that?
Don't you generally have an extra pair of readers?
Your glasses?
Yeah, mine went out. Don't mind. The rest of it, I don't worry. Not worry out there. Yeah. I'm the
To
same
get some
way.
readers.
Exactly. Can you hear us, Chad?
Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me?
Can.
Oh, awesome.
Ty's coughing up his readers.
I hope 8 power is not too much.
Magnifiers, huh? What else? What part of? Mason, have you got can you hear us?
I can, thank you. You can hear me, I assume.
Oh, boy, that's. We'll be opening this in just a minute. Denise ran to get some
there
reading
we go.
glasses for some of us.
Let's see which one you like
Those
better.
work?
Just start keeping a pair.
Yeah.
We're all there. We all just need a setup here.
stretch I'm the opposite. Next time you go to Costco, buy 5 packets.
I'll find a 5-pack and just put a set up here for all of us.
Get 15 of them and set them up there.
I'm getting to that point where I gotta start stashing them in all my trucks and everything.
Hey, welcome everybody in attendance, and we acknowledge all of those that are electronically with us. Let's see, our items for discussion is a water conveyance and development agreement between Morgan City, Como Springs Resort LLC and Grande Real Estate, Resolution 22-34. I have a little sub note that we can have a summary by Mason and Ty. Who would like to be first?
I'll start, Mason, then you can get into the details after that, since you're the details guy and I'm mostly correct. You told me that before. It's like what I said was mostly correct, but anyway, we did a will serve letter that said that we were willing to serve Como Springs, water and sewer and power. Quite some time ago, their development is in a county process. They've been working through that on a conditional use permit, but in the meantime, we've since that letter, we've gone back and forth with our engineer and said, just said, here's what's required. You got to build it to our standards. Here's what those standards are. So they've had to design it to city standards. And then you also have to transfer water rights. And so we went back and forth with them. They really couldn't figure out what we were asking for. And so we engaged Mason to work with them and then literally just draft the agreement, study the water rights to make sure that they're conveyed correctly, and that the city's protected. And he's done a really good job at that. And then we finally got to a point where both parties agreed. So basically, they have to give us the adequate water rights for their development. If their development expands or their water usage increases past what we've agreed to, they have already pre-committed to additional shares. And if they're giving us the shares, and then when we apply to the state to have the shares do the change application, if the change application shorts us, right, because it's going from whatever ag use to culinary, and if in that exchange of water right, it's short what we required, then they've also committed And they have plenty of shares to do that with, but the agreement had to kind of be structured in a way that protected us on the back end if water usage was more than what the shares transferred, if that makes sense. Then we have talked, it'll be built to city standards. We will monitor that. And then it'll also loop our water system, which means on both sides of town, we just have one backup. If a water line needs to be fed from a different route, that allows us to do that, but it also helps us equalize pressure on different sources on both sides of town. So it's an advantage. Then a lot of I get this question a lot is why they're not annexed in. And way back when they first approached us, annexation, we just didn't have a zone to even offer them. So if we would have annexed Como into the city, we don't have any zones that would allow that sort of a use to happen, and the whole project would have just been a no-go. So that's where we've been. Mason, if there's any details on the terms of the contract or anything I missed, or if you need to clarify something if I misspoke, now's your chance.
Perfect. Well, I'm open to questions from the members. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the contract. Because this is an extraterritorial service, we've worked in some of the negotiated agreement to make sure that each of us are achieving the goals that we would like. I mean, at the end of the day, Como just wants to have a business that they can run and have reliable water and sewer. We want to be able to make sure that if we're going to service that area, that they're paying fair rates and that they're also going to assure that our water source is protected enough that we can draw upon it in perpetuity. So we've got these provisions to make sure that everybody's paying fair freight, that that the water that is used by the resort actually matches what was given to us as this sort of water rights dedication. There is going to be additional work necessary with the state, and that's anticipated, as Ty had indicated, that if the state does a shave like it often does, that we can go back and sort of dip in for a little bit more to make sure that we're getting the right amounts. But I'll just open the floor to questions or however else you'd like to proceed, Mayor.
Mason, I have a question. So if this 9.9 acre feet, I assume that was some formula that somehow that number came about. So in the change application, so with that 9.9 acre feet, for whatever reason, is not 9.9 acre feet, are we saying that then we're going to require some more shares of their water to equal that 9.9 acre feet? Did that make sense?
Yes, I see the question. So first of all, to answer the question, the calculation was done by the engineer. Engineer indicated that this is the amount of water we would need to service what is proposed for this land use. If we find that amount actually is higher, like the use is higher than the 9 acre feet, then we can go back and ask for more than the 9.9. And then to your second half of the question, that is correct, that if we then go to the state engineer shaves it because we're changing the point of use or the type of use to municipal, then we can go back and ask for that additional conveyance from their water right. And for clarity, I know that this always gets conflated just because colloquially a share and a right sound like the same thing. This would be a partitioned water right, not a share of an irrigation company.
So Mason, along the same line of on the amount of shares, why would we limit ourselves to an additional 2 acre feet? I mean, what if it took 3? What if it took 5? Wouldn't that be the developer's responsibility or risk?
Correct. Now, what we did is we did it in 2 acre feet tranches. We're not just limited to 2 additional acre feet, but to these additional portions that was part of a negotiated settlement as we negotiated back and forth between the city. If that isn't acceptable to the council, then there's certainly something that we could re-examine. But the sincere concern from the developer was that they just didn't want to have an open well, to use a pun, so that the city could come back and draw more and more and more. They wanted to have some kind of cap or limit so that we can then do this in a procedural fashion that makes sense.
Well, okay, then just suppose that it took an additional 5 acre feet. How would that play out?
So as I understand it, let's suppose that we do a partition and a change application on 9.9 acre feet. And then
Sure.
to pull the math out, we need it, the state said, well, we're going to shave off 5 acre feet. Then we would be going back to the developer and saying, look, you've been reduced or disallowed by the state engineer, and we're asking for an additional 2 acre feet, but recognize that this paragraph, and I'm talking about paragraph 8, shall quote, continue in perpetuity and may be repeatedly required. So we would then say, look, we're going to repeatedly require another 2 acre feet and then another 1 acre feet to make up the difference. Now, we would actually have to pre-calculate that each of those tranches are going to be shaved by, I'm just going to say roughly 50% using the math we've talked about, that 5 acre feet. And so we're going to have to work with the developer to make that so that the outcome is a total of 9 acre feet of metered water that go into our wells.
The agreement is, then I'm just looking for it. I don't have it right in front of me, but so it says, on page 3 on number 4, it says grantors shall grant a second conveyance of water from the water right or equivalent up to, but not exceeding an additional 2 acre feet. Such this conveyance shall dedicate enough water to the city to bring the total amount to the 9.9. Not exceeding the up to, but not exceeding the 2 acre feet kind of seemed like it's a cap to me. Is that, am I reading that wrong?
No, you're reading it correctly, but you need to also read paragraph 8. So the second conveyance would be no more than 2 acre feet. But there is then a third conveyance in paragraph 8, again, in a 2 acre foot tranche. And then paragraph 8 can be repeated as necessary to bring us to 9.9. And I'll just be frank, like the 2 acre foot amount was selected based on our negotiations. It certainly isn't my preference, but that was what the developer felt more comfortable with, that there was some kind of limit. I don't know where the source of distrust came from. I don't know if it's a distrust in the state or in the city or just the process, but that was where we arrived as a mutually agreeable solution. I felt that it protected the city because we can ask for enough of these conveyances, especially the third conveyance, which is repeatable, to get us to the 9.9. But again, if the council thinks that we need to push back on that, we can push back on that. This isn't set in stone.
I mean, that's a good answer, and it seems to, satisfy the question. I mean, on your part, would there be a reason that you could see that it would make sense to push back?
Well, I did push back on it, and that's where we arrived.
Okay.
I thought that we could still protect the city and concede the point of whether or not there was going to be a 2 acre foot cap. The cost benefit here is how much time and money is going to be invested in doing these little partitions and then asking for designated changes to the point of use and the type of use, right? If we have to do multiple tranches of it, then yeah, there's going to be some application fees and some legal fees associated with that. I will say this, however, my understanding going in, and this is just reading the tea leaves, kind of putting my finger up to the wind and hoping the best. A change application on this type of water use isn't going to be subject to a whole lot of shave, as I estimate it. Now, I will be the first to say that I'm not the state engineer, and I could definitely be wrong.
Okay.
But we're changing what in essence is a well right to a well right. The risk here is that the well on Como Springs' property is a shallow water well, whereas the city wells are deeper water and they're municipal use. Although this water right is not strictly ag, it's also culinary. So we could argue to the state engineer that the shave should be minimal, if not zero. So there is that to consider as well.
So,
I mean, it appears that I think you've got us covered. I mean, nothing comes to mind that would say anything different would be required or necessary. So good word, good answer. Thank you.
Mason, my question is, so this 9.9 acre feet, I assume was based on what they're proposing to do on that property. Is that correct?
That is correct. And if you have deeper questions on that, I'm not equipped to answer. That's going to be the engineer. But in short, they provided a list of uses, the types of uses, the spaces that were going to be used, the type of, and I can't remember if it's cabins or hookups or whatever. The engineer calculated it, and this is what he came up with as the appropriate estimate. There's also a provision that then if they overuse, they're either overcharged or they have to bring in more water.
So eventually down the road, if they decided to do a different kind of an amenity over at Como that required a lot more water, they would, through this agreement, they would have to provide more water. Is that correct?
Yes, and let me answer that in a little more specificity. There's a provision in here that says that if they ever change the land use, I mean, let's just imagine just in a weird universe that they put some kind of 40-unit hotel down there. Then all of this agreement no longer applies. They're going to have to renegotiate with the city about extraterritorial service and the kind of water use that is associated with that. But let's imagine that the resort actually puts in more hookups than are previously anticipated. There is a different provision that says you can go ahead and keep using the water under this agreement, but if you start using, 15 acre feet, you better start bringing, you better either pay the overage rate up to a certain limit, but if you do this consistently over a number of years, then you're gonna have to bring in more water. And would it be helpful to point you to that section?
I was gonna ask on their overage rate, what's that figure? Just the normal city overage rate?
No, because they're extraterritorial, they're actually paying a premium in part because of the extraterritorial service allowances. If you'd like, I can go through the agreement and show you where that's at.
So does it come down to a question if you want increased revenue due to overage, or do you want increased water?
Well, it's less a question and it's more a framework. If they overuse 1 year, then they're going to pay the standard extraterritorial overage rates as agreed to, and it's in paragraph 7 here, 150%. If they do that consistently 3 or more times within 10 years, then they've got to bring in more water.
Chad, you had any experience with this stuff? You're muted.
A little bit, not a whole bunch, not as good as Mason and Ty, but it's making sense, what he's talking about. Yeah,
You look good in that Morgan City hat and shirt.
hey, thank you.
Is that your backyard?
Yeah, it's a side.
Good deal. Is there any more discussion or?
I've got a couple of things, maybe directed at Ty and Steve Garside. I mean, I'd like to talk just a little bit more, Ty, about the annexing concept. The first of the year we passed an ordinance that said no new construction outside the city boundaries shall receive approval of a preliminary application. New construction shall be required to annex to the city before receiving water service. It seems to me that, of course, most of what we're seeing here is new construction. Why wouldn't we expect the annexation?
So we signed the will serve letter before we made that determination on annexation.
Well, well, of course, so that will serve letter was before January?
Yeah, yeah, it was, that was part of our discussion. The other thing is, we were not opposed to annexation. In fact, I think we would probably entertain annexation once our new general plan and zoning is adopted. So right now, we don't have a zone to offer them. But the new general plan and our new ordinances have some more river-oriented options, and then that area has been considered. So, you know, at a future date, I don't think we would have a problem with annexation. It's just currently, we had already committed to provide them services before the city made a determination to not extend our services without annexation. So that was
Okay.
a timing thing. And then since that point, if we have the zoning that allows, you know, that recreational use,
Mm-hmm.
and we have the standards to back that up, then I think we would maybe, I'm not saying we would, but it would be, you know, back on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to request.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a good answer for sure. Although, if they've got the water, if they've got the sewer, what other incentive would there be to annex? I mean, could we conceivably end up with maybe an island out there because we don't have any incentive to annex?
So we still have roads, streets. So if there's a public street, you know, that comes right up to their doorstop, that will get plowed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that sort of thing.
Okay. I've got one other question. Number 14 on page 5, improper management of privately owned utilities. Goes on to talk about, and again, Macy, you've done a great job in, I think, covering risk to the city, but goes on to talk about, you know, contamination and cleaning and of the system and so forth. Do we have any other privately owned utilities in Morgan, or will this be our first one?
I'm going to have to defer to Ty on that one. This,
Yeah,
and
so
just to answer your
we have-
question a little bit, this particular paragraph was drafted in this way, knowing that they're in a flood zone and knowing that they currently have a privately owned sanitary system or culinary system that they have to disconnect from their sources.
Mhm.
So in that sense, we would have a meter that would be dropping culinary water onto their property, and then they're going to have to manage it from there. But they better not be cross-contaminating by drawing upon their own sources and injecting it into that culinary system.
Mhm. Yeah, I and again, I guess part of my reason for asking about other privately owned utilities would be just the enforcement, the maintenance of them. How do we track that? Is that something that's even doable?
Yeah, so we monitor, Chad and his crew monitor every connection. We do that already, but like in an HOA where you have a master meter, that's a similar situation. I don't know if the trailer park has a master meter, if they're individual connections. But that's kind of the scenario, right? Anybody that's connected to our system, we have purview over. Really, it's just ownership is just saying at what point the meter connects to our main and we're no longer responsible. It means they're going to maintain from the master meter forward, but they still can't cross-contaminate. They still can't mismanage the operation of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to say they can't, and we all agree to it, but all of a sudden we've got contamination and somebody has, it's too late. The cat's out of the bag, so to speak. I mean, again, are we inspecting it from time to time? Are we, surprise visit to say, let's make sure that, it's clean? My guess is probably not, but what do we do to ensure that it stays safe?
One of
Man, oh,
one of the things we talked about, Dave, when secondary water came around was this very thing, not with a business necessarily, but with just a private residence. How do we make sure that nobody is, contaminating our culinary with secondary, making a switch or a change there. So, yeah, I think it's always a little bit of a concern, but really isn't I don't think we ever come up with a good way to ensure that there wasn't a private resident out there that maybe was trying to, somehow get the system contaminated by switching from culinary to secondary or secondary to culinary on their sprinkler system.
Yeah.
so we do take samples every month, 4 samples, and they are in place kind of in areas that could contaminate. But on top of that is when we do like an HOA, we have that master meter for them, but also a double check valve. So nothing possibly could come back into our system.
Mhm.
And them are inspected yearly. And that's something that we'd probably require for this, KOA to have, is some double check valves in place and to make sure that nothing gets contaminated into our system.
So, yeah, great, Chad. Thank you. So, Mason, would that be part of the agreement, or is that just part of our operation?
As I understand it, that's not specifically in the agreement, because when I worked through this with the engineer, he had indicated the looping and the master meter and all the other things would be built to the city and state codes. If you look in number 11, that's one of the spots where it talks about that. And the looping that's going to be built by the developer would include a portion of the lateral up to the master meter. And if it's required by our existing code, the double check valve, then yeah, we could say that they have to do it without having to reference it here in this agreement itself. If it's of a greater concern to the council that we need to be more specific, then I'm going to need to.
Oh,
I guess we lost him there for a minute. Ty, your thoughts? Is that just something that we can incorporate in our regular?
And look through all of their systems to make sure that it's working correctly.
yeah, so I think that we have enough in our operation and the state standards on how you operate a water utility that we're well
Right.
covered.
Okay.
I think the hardest part is if we do get in that situation, we delivered, clean water up to the master meter. If there's a problem beyond that point, our problem is that we just we shut it off at the meter, right? So then you get a lot of other people saying, hey, why don't I have water, when it might only be 1 or 2, connections. But that's the big difference of saying we own right up to each individual connection versus a master meter. But like Chad said, we test behind, we take our samples. It's really, really low risk. And if there is something that's just totally neglectful, behind the meter, then the answer is we just shut it off at the meter until they get it compliance.
Hey, so Chad, just with this new, private utility coming online, would it be well to, and particularly considering the flood zone, the fact that it's in a low area, is this an area that we could maybe earmark for testing?
Yeah, absolutely. It would probably be one of the highly ones that we do, because we have an odd and an even month. And so even we would probably try to add that every month, because I do one side of one part of the city and then the other side the next month. So odd and evens. And so this one, we'd probably get with the state and let them know that we're going to do that once a month, where if we did have a leak and some kind of a big leak and it vacuumed, back in, or somebody turned something on really fast. Again, that only jeopardizes them on their side, not on our side, because of that double check valve and backflow preventers that we're going to require. We should.
The fact that it's looped, though, that doesn't jeopardize us.
Well, see, they'll be getting their water after that main master meter, and then we'll have that by the meter. That will be where our backflow preventer will be, so that nothing gets past our meter into the loop.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh.
What you're saying, Chad, is if you had to shut that meter off, that because of the looping and the redundancy, really the only people that would be without water would be those behind that meter. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep. Yes, sir. Like Ty's saying, they would have to be in compliance and get it up, to parts to where we can turn it back on again. We would take, multiple sample tests to make sure there's nothing, harmful or hurting them, because we do supply them good, clean, safe water. And then they should have something in the agreements if they're a private company. Because after the meter, they could put on whatever fittings they like, whatever.
Yeah.
And if there is a leak or something, but we'd be glad to take samples from that area every month, all year, 12 out of 12 months. We take one and make sure that they're safe and everybody's safe. And if Ty's okay with that, and the mayor.
Do you know that? And then again, look at it from the big picture, but that may make sense. I think there's maybe a heightened risk because of the low flood zone nature of the area.
Yeah.
Just to answer that a little bit too, it's not the only place our water lines are in the floodway. We cross the rivers, and the city standard or the design was they're allowed to cross the floodway perpendicular, but they're not allowed to, our line will not be going lengthwise down the floodway. So it's a crossing across the floodway, our main line, right? But then the connection and everything on our side shouldn't pose an issue, if that makes sense.
That'd be the same with this new connection. It isn't paralleling anything.
Yep.
Okay. Well, good discussion. That answers my questions. Thank you.
I have an amateur question. So when we say it's a loop, we're saying from like the 100 South, where it would enter there and then go across the river towards the fairgrounds. Is that, am I thinking right?
Yes, sir.
So on both ends of that, there would be those valves.
So right now, 100 South goes down 100 South and dead ends. Commercial Street goes down and dead ends. And the loop would tie those two together so that the water flows.
Yeah, but you'd have some sort of a valve at each.
On both
of those
sides, yep,
connections.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yep. Yeah, you can always isolate that.
got it. Any more discussion?
That's on our work agenda, so I guess we'll see that later.
Okay, Item 2, the bid award to Deer Hollow Retention Basin Reconstruction Project, Resolution 2235. I've got a note that Kai, you can update us on that.
Sure. So this is a detention pond in the back of, is that Deer Hollow? I don't know what that subdivision's called. Deer Hollow, is that? Yeah. That's the home, but anyway, at the end of the construction of that subdivision, there's a detention pond in the back of this yard. We've gone back and forth with them on a handful of issues, but it was how it is, it was not how it was designed to be. We had a power pole in there, and the design doesn't meet our current city standards for slope. I think it was a 3-to-1 at the time, but so anyway, we've been working with them to just get this cleaned up, get it fixed, and then, you know, get separation so that the city's out of there. You know, the subdivision, their backyard was all left how it was supposed to be, but our engineer redesigned that so that it would function. It was never designed to function as a backyard. It was a detention pond. And then the house came later, however that worked. But basically, we've moved our power pole out. We've had it designed so that it would function and have the right capacity. And instead of doing the work ourselves, we put it out to bid, and we can get this all wrapped up. And then they would just be responsible to landscape it and maintain it from that point forward.
This isn't our first rodeo with this.
Right.
Uh,
And so just, I don't want to interrupt, but I recognize that, went back and forth on the, like, ownership, the legal back and forth, and just needs to be cleaned up and put to bed so that it's never an issue. That was kind of my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, let's move on. But I guess my question is, so what are they going to do to make it right, so to speak? You know, I mean, it'll still be a detention basin in their backyard, right?
Right, correct.
But are we talking about the slopes and all that sort of thing are going to be?
Yep. That's what this project does, is to bring it into our current standards, designed, you know, the engineer redesigned it so that it would function both as a backyard and a detention pond. We've moved the power pole and the guy wire out. And then the overflow still goes into the ditch right behind there. And then,
Out and down.
yep. So then we're like, we're done. We're gonna reshape it, get it to, it didn't fit a standard, right? So before,
No, it didn't, but we proposed basically the same idea.
Yeah, we
several
did.
Years ago.
We did.
we're doing it. I mean, that's kind of the
Yeah.
idea, is like,
Yeah.
we can get it done in a hurry, with a contractor, and that's kind of my perspective, is when you find something, you can either spend the next however many years fighting about it, or you can get it cleaned up and move on and not talk about it anymore. And so that's kind of the approach that I've taken with them, and they're responsible from, you know, landscaping, all that's theirs. It's sprinkler system, it'll all function.
Right.
But when we leave it, we're gonna know that it was left to city specs, and just
Gonna put it to bed.
put it, it's kind of so when I first came here, I don't know if you remember, but I asked my first 2 years was basically like, is this something you want to talk about or something you want to do? And that's how we got the bridge, right? We've talked about it for years. That's the path that we've been on. And so we did the bidding, and because we didn't have a meeting last time, I bid it out, and
I like it.
awarded it, and then this just ratifies that, and then the project gets done.
That's, I think it's one of those things where you just correct it and move on.
Yep.
Good approach, Ty.
No,
Yeah.
you're good.
Any more discussion on item 2? Or are you okay?
I'm okay.
Okay. Go to item 3, First Amendment to the Interlocal Cooperation Agreement between Morgan City Redevelopment Agency and Morgan City Corporation dated November 13th, 2018. Resolution 2236.
Well, I believe the guys on that RDA board just barely took care of that one,
I
so
believe so.
that should be fairly straightforward.
Yep, but it is a chance to review the document that, you know, on the city side, so
Sure.
it's appropriate to have it on both.
Yep.
I mean, we have to pass it as a city, so just if there was any lingering questions, and it's on the work agenda.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I read through it. It looks good.
Okay. Let's move on to item 4. Guess we pronounce that Lumen, billing acknowledgement, letter of intent, commercial street realign, relocation of utilities. Ty?
Yep, so that commercial street realignment that we completed, now we put the utilities in the ground. And we did not have a franchise agreement with CenturyLink or Lumen, and that we're still working on that. We'll be probably the first city to ever have one, so we're kind of gonna be proud of that. But even if we had one where they had a prescriptive easement along the river, anytime you say, hey, you gotta move, then, you know, we gotta participate in that. Our guys did a really good job. Lance has done a great job communicating with them, keeping the conversation going, but our guys did the trench and put the conduit in the ground. But this payment will be their cost to move that overhead line, put it into the ground, pull the wire, make their connections. It gets rid of all of the overhead line except for right next to the bus garage. There's a secondary or a feed that goes across the river to at Jenkins home. They're currently a customer on that line. That doesn't interfere with the bridge project, so that'll stay. But the rest of that overhead line needs to be out of the way before we do the bridge. And so originally this bill was 54,000.
I think it was about 57 and some change.
So, yeah, and then we met with them out there. We said, what if we do this? What if we do that? You know, so rethink this, and with what we were doing, told them, you know, go back and reevaluate what you're charging us here, because when we met on site, we came up with some cost saving measures, and so this is the new amount. So that's what that is.
The 47 is what we pay then?
Yep.
Okay. There aren't additional charges that talked about design and engineering. There aren't other.
Nope, it's all in, yep, it's all their costs include design, engineering, and the actual work.
Yeah.
To the construction cost for them to pull the wire and make the new connections.
I'd have just one other comment, Ty. It's not a big deal and it won't amount to anything, but the agreement gives the appearance that you're guaranteeing this personally. Maybe when you sign it, just put Ty Bailey, manager, Morgan City, and then it may take you individually off the hook.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
As long as I'm not personally paying.
Not a deal, but
I mean, I do
use-
care about the city, but I have limits.
yeah, it does use the word I quite a bit in there.
Good catch.
So this basically, if I understand that, is it's serving one customer there?
the line that we're moving is a main, it's a
Okay.
main line.
And
What
then
I'm
they just
saying is,
Off of that main line, one customer.
yeah,
Okay.
because we were hoping to get all the overhead out of the way and nothing over the river. But that's at a later date. Once the bridge is finished, the bridge will also have a conduit on the bridge that if needed, they could move that overhead to that T, go across the bridge and then feed the home
Okay.
that way. But we're gonna address that later if there's still a customer at that point and after the bridge is completed.
There's a lot of customers that don't have landlines anymore, but wire's still going to their homes,
Mhm.
like mine.
Yeah.
I don't have a landline, but I still got a cable coming to my house. I wish I'd go clean them up.
But you drove a tractor into that on accident by now. Interesting. Wasn't that the low hanger?
It's a good bird perch, though.
Yeah. And he came down and cut the lines and walked
Okay,
away.
item 5, is there any more discussion on item 4? We good?
I don't have any.
Item 5 is information only, contract for solid waste collection for Morgan City and Morgan County, term 22 through 27. I think everybody is aware that the contract was signed with Robinson Waste. Is that how they say their name?
Mhm.
Is there any discussion on that? I think they're a great company myself.
And just, maybe just for the record, Mayor, if you're okay.
Yeah.
That we did put it out to bid, received proposals, and we reviewed it. And so that was discussed in a previous city council meeting. This is just feedback to the council that we executed the contract. And at the time, it was still pending the county's approval. And so the county approved, we approved, we've signed it. Just for the record.
Hey, Ty, a couple of questions. We've got the new rate's got $6.59 for the first container. What was the previous rate?
That's a great question. I can't remember now. It was close to that. Yeah, it was, I want to say the higher side of 5.
Okay,
And so this was option B, wasn't.
No, because that would be for the lumen.
Yeah. Sorry, David, I forgot what the exact
okay.
previous
You-
amount was. We started this process like 3 months ago.
I mean, you don't remember it being as significant. It seemed like it was in line with where,
Oh, yeah. No, it was definitely in line, recognizing some increased costs. And then
Yeah.
this agreement has those costs built in for fuel and
okay,
that sort of thing. But it was pretty much what we had
okay.
currently. But had we been mid-contract, I think we would have had the same pricing with the fuel escalator
Uh-huh.
this year as when we just re-signed the same contract. So it was really close. I just can't remember what the,
So we're good for 5 years from now then. It's, he holds the same rate adjusted for fuel, and I noticed there was a inflation clause in there also.
Always was a fuel surcharge rate in there.
yeah, on our current contract though, he went a couple years without charging us anything extra for fuel and so, you know, they've just been really good to work with.
Good.
Okay, do we have any more discussion? Item 6, Steve, we have you down for training. Do you have?
It actually says Gary's the training, and I want to know, I just want to express how much I appreciate your training him. He's He's getting better all the time, thanks to you folks.
You know, he's a quick study though, Steve. We don't have too much trouble with him. No, we
He did-
appreciate
he-
help.
Yeah, he did not tell me about that part of the meeting. I should have looked at the agenda, but I just looked at the packet. So
Are you asking us to train you?
please, and again, I can go back to, my wife would appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
Give them a break.
Well, if we don't have any training, I'd like to adjourn this meeting, close Zoom. We'll give everybody a little break and we'll see everybody at 7 o'clock.